Healing from divorce, she meets a man who seems ordinary but hides a significant secret. He's a CEO. Can she trust and love again? And if you cherish your family and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. The taxi weaved through Seoul's congested streets as Ji-yoon pressed her forehead against the cool glass window. Digital billboards and towering skyscrapers dominated the landscape, a stark contrast to the quieter life she'd left behind. Her wedding ring finger felt naked, the pale strip of skin a constant reminder of her failed marriage. The driver attempted small talk, but she responded with brief nods, too absorbed in her thoughts about the past 3 months. The divorce papers had been finalized just weeks ago, ending 7 years of what she'd thought would be forever. Now at 32, Ji-yoon found herself starting over in a city that felt simultaneously overwhelming and anonymous. Her design portfolio, carefully curated over years of work, was her only real source of confidence as she pursued new clients in Seoul's competitive interior design market. The taxi pulled up to her new apartment building in a middle-class neighborhood. Ji-yoon paid the fare and dragged her 2 suitcases into the elevator, the rest of her belongings scheduled to arrive by moving truck the next day. The apartment on the 12th floor was modest but modern, a single bedroom, an open-plan living area, and a small balcony overlooking the bustling street below. Opening the first suitcase, Ji-yoon began the methodical process of unpacking. Each item carried memories, the coffee maker her ex-husband had given her for their 3rd anniversary, now wrapped in newspaper. Photographs she hadn't had the heart to throw away, quickly tucked into a drawer without looking at them, design magazines that had once inspired their home renovation projects together. The empty walls and bare surfaces of the apartment seemed to mock her with their possibility, demanding to be filled with a new life she wasn't sure how to create. Evening descended on the city, and Ji-yoon realized she hadn't eaten all day. Rather than order delivery, she decided to explore her new neighborhood. A small cafe caught her attention, its warm lighting and wooden interior visible through large windows. Inside, the aroma of freshly ground coffee provided immediate comfort. She chose a corner table, ordering an Americano and a sandwich, and pulled out her tablet to review some design proposals. Around her, life continued its steady rhythm. Young couples shared desserts, students hunched over laptops, and business people rushed in for takeaway coffee. Ji-yoon found herself studying these strangers, wondering if any of them could read the failure she felt written across her face. Her own reflection in the window showed a woman she barely recognized, thinner than before, with dark circles under her eyes partially hidden by makeup. 3 months ago, she had been hosting dinner parties in her perfectly decorated home, playing the role of the successful designer wife. Now, she sat alone in a cafe full of strangers, her wedding ring locked away in a jewelry box, trying to convince herself that starting over at this age wasn't as terrifying as it felt. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother, asking if she'd settled in okay. Ji-yoon replied with a brief, "Yes, everything's fine," knowing it was easier than explaining the hollow feeling in her chest. As the evening crowd thinned out, Ji-yoon remained at her table, nursing her now-cold coffee. The cafe's playlist had shifted to slower, mellower songs, matching her mood. She opened her design portfolio again, reviewing projects she'd completed over the years. Each design represented a piece of herself she'd poured into creating beautiful spaces for others while her own life had slowly unraveled. The familiar rhythm of Ji-yoon's cafe visits was interrupted one rainy Tuesday evening when Min-jun walked in. He carried himself with natural confidence, but without the typical arrogance she'd come to expect from well-dressed men in Seoul. His charcoal suit was expertly tailored, yet he moved with an ease that made him appear approachable rather than intimidating. Ji-yoon noticed him first because of his laugh, warm and genuine, as he joked with the barista. It was the kind of laugh that made others want to join in, even without knowing the joke. She caught herself staring and quickly looked back at her tablet, pretending to be absorbed in her work. But the cafe was crowded that evening, and the only available seat was at the communal table where she sat. "Excuse me," Min-jun said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "Would you mind if I joined you? I promise I won't disturb your work." His voice carried a hint of playfulness that made Ji-yoon look up properly. Their eyes met, and she found herself nodding before she could overthink it. As he settled in with his coffee, Min-joon glanced at her tablet screen. "Interior design?" he asked, noting the floor plans displayed. "You have an interesting approach to space utilization." The comment wasn't the usual small talk she expected. He actually seemed to understand what he was looking at. "You know about interior design?" Ji-yoon asked, surprised by his genuine interest. "Enough to be dangerous," he replied with a slight smile. "My company works with designers occasionally, though I must admit, your layouts show more creativity than what I typically see." He pointed to a particular feature in her design. "The way you've integrated natural light here, it's clever." The conversation flowed naturally from there. Min-joon asked thoughtful questions about her work, and Ji-yoon found herself explaining her design philosophy with increasing animation. He listened intently, offering insights that revealed a deeper understanding of architecture and design than he initially let on. "So, what brings you to this cafe?" he asked during a lull in their discussion. "I'm here often, but I don't remember seeing you before." Ji-yoon hesitated, considering how much to reveal. "I recently moved to the neighborhood," she said simply. "The cafe has good coffee and better lighting than my apartment." Min-joon nodded, accepting her partial answer without pressing for more. "The owner, Mr. Kim, takes his coffee seriously. He imports the beans directly from small farms in Colombia and Ethiopia." He shared this information like he was letting her in on a secret, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Their conversation shifted to coffee, a safer topic than personal histories. Min-joon told amusing stories about his quest to find the perfect cup in Seoul, and Ji-yoon found herself laughing genuinely for the first time in months. His self-deprecating humor and easy manner made her forget, momentarily, about the weight she'd been carrying. As the evening progressed, they discovered shared interests in contemporary art and traditional Korean architecture. Min-joon's knowledge surprised her. He moved effortlessly between discussing modern design trends and historical building techniques. When he mentioned an upcoming exhibition at a local gallery, Ji-yoon caught herself wondering if it was an indirect invitation. The cafe's closing time caught them both by surprise. They had been talking for nearly 3 hours, their coffee long finished. "I should let you get back to your work," Min-joon said, gathering his things. "But I enjoyed our conversation." He paused, then added with a smile, "Perhaps we'll run into each other again?" The question hung in the air, casual enough to be comfortable, but genuine enough to hint at possibility. Ji-yoon found herself hoping they would meet again, even as she reminded herself not to read too much into a pleasant conversation with a stranger. Over the next few weeks, Ji-yoon and Min-joon's chance meetings at the cafe became increasingly frequent. What started as coincidental encounters evolved into an unspoken routine. They would find themselves at the cafe around the same time, sharing the same table, their conversations growing deeper with each meeting. During one particularly quiet evening, Min-joon noticed Ji-yoon's hands trembling slightly as she held her coffee cup. She had just finished telling him about a difficult client meeting, but he sensed there was more beneath the surface. "You seem troubled," he said gently, pushing aside his laptop to give her his full attention. "Is it that obvious?" Ji-yoon attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The warmth and concern in Min-joon's expression broke something loose inside her. "I was married," she said finally, the words coming out in a rush. "For 7 years. The divorce was finalized 3 months ago." Min-joon didn't immediately offer platitudes or advice. Instead, he listened as Ji-yoon slowly unraveled the story of her marriage, how it had started with such promise, the gradual erosion of trust, the final devastating discovery of her ex-husband's infidelity. Her voice remained steady, but her fingers twisted the paper napkin into shreds. "The hardest part," she continued, staring into her coffee, "isn't even the betrayal. It's the doubt. I question everything now, my judgment, my worth, my ability to trust again." She looked up, expecting to see pity in Min-joon's eyes, but found only understanding. "Trust isn't just about other people," Min-joon replied thoughtfully. "It's about trusting yourself too." He shared his own experience of a failed engagement years ago, how it had shaped his approach to relationships. I learned that vulnerability isn't weakness, he said. It's about having the courage to be seen, really seen, by another person. Their conversations began to venture beyond safe topics into more personal territory. Ji-yoon found herself sharing her fears about starting over in Seoul, while Min-jun spoke about the pressure of living up to others' expectations. They discussed their families, their dreams, and their disappointments, each revelation building a bridge between them. One evening, as rain pattered against the cafe windows, Min-jun confessed his own insecurities about relationships. Success in business is straightforward compared to matters of the heart, he admitted. Numbers make sense. People are more complicated. Ji-yoon nodded, understanding the sentiment all too well. At least with design, there are principles to follow, she said. Love doesn't come with a blueprint. They developed a habit of sharing their daily challenges and small victories. When Ji-yoon landed a significant design project, Min-jun was the first person she wanted to tell. When he struggled with a difficult decision at work, she offered a perspective that helped him see things differently. Their connection deepened through these exchanges, building a foundation of trust neither had expected to find. They created a safe space where they could be themselves without pretense or judgment. Min-jun never pushed for more than Ji-yoon was ready to give, and she found herself gradually lowering the walls she'd built after her divorce. As weeks passed, they established their own private language of shared jokes and references. The cafe became their sanctuary, a place where they could shed their professional personas and simply exist together in comfortable understanding. The morning of Ji-yoon's important client meeting started with unusual tension. She stood in the sleek corporate office lobby, clutching her portfolio and presentation materials. The client, a luxury hotel chain, was known for being particularly demanding. As she waited, her phone buzzed with a message from Min-jun. You've got this. Remember, they need your vision more than you need their approval. The meeting room was intimidating, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul's skyline, leather chairs surrounding a massive conference table. Ji-yoon had just begun her presentation when the door opened, and Min-jun walked in. For a moment, she lost her train of thought, confused by his presence. He gave her a subtle nod and took a seat at the far end of the table. Throughout her presentation, Ji-yoon felt Min-jun's steady gaze. When the hotel executives began their aggressive questioning about her design choices, she noticed him leaning forward slightly, his presence somehow giving her strength. One particularly difficult executive challenged her budget estimates, suggesting her designs were too ambitious. Before she could respond, Min-jun spoke up. If I may, he said, his voice carrying authority she hadn't heard before, Ms. Park's designs actually demonstrate remarkable efficiency in space utilization. Her approach would reduce operational costs by approximately 15% compared to traditional layouts. The room fell silent, and Ji-yoon realized there was more to Min-jun than she'd understood. After the meeting, which ended with the clients approving her proposal, Min-jun waited for her in the lobby. I'm sorry I didn't mention I'd be there, he said. I didn't want to make you nervous. My company has investments in the hotel chain. They decided to celebrate at a quiet restaurant nearby. Over dinner, Min-jun watched Ji-yoon's animated excitement about winning the project. You didn't need my help in there, he said. Your work speaks for itself. You just needed to believe it. Why didn't you tell me about your connection to the hotel? Ji-yoon asked, curiosity finally getting the better of her. Min-jun paused, choosing his words carefully. I enjoy being just Min-jun with you, he said. No titles, no expectations. Just me. His honesty made Ji-yoon realize how much she valued their uncomplicated connection. The evening progressed, and their conversation turned to deeper topics. Min-jun spoke about the weight of responsibility he carried, though he remained vague about the details of his position. Ji-yoon shared her fears about failing in her new life in Seoul. Your past doesn't define your future, Min-jun said, reaching across the table to touch her hand briefly. Trust me on this. Ji-yoon felt a familiar uncertainty creep in. The warmth of Min-jun's presence conflicted with her instinct to protect herself from further hurt. She pulled her hand back slightly, not ready to acknowledge the growing connection between them. As they left the restaurant, the city lights reflecting off rain-slicked streets, Ji-yoon found herself wondering about Min-jun's world. There were pieces of his life he kept carefully hidden, and while she understood the need for privacy, something about his careful omissions made her uneasy. When Soo-yeon called Ji-yoon late one night, sobbing about her sudden breakup, Ji-yoon immediately invited her over. The sound of her friend's pain struck a familiar chord, reminding her of her own recent struggles. Soo-yeon arrived at Ji-yoon's apartment with red-rimmed eyes and a bottle of soju, looking nothing like her usually polished self. He said I was too focused on my career, Soo-yeon said, slumping onto Ji-yoon's couch. As if being ambitious is a character flaw. She poured herself a drink with shaking hands. 5 years, Ji-yoon. 5 years gone because he couldn't handle my success. Ji-yoon sat beside her friend, remembering her own lonely nights after her divorce. I know it doesn't feel like it now, but you're stronger than you think, she said, taking Soo-yeon's hand. Remember how you helped me through my divorce? You didn't let me give up then. I won't let you give up now. As the night progressed, their conversation shifted from pain to anger, then to reluctant laughter as they shared stories of their romantic mishaps. Ji-yoon found herself talking about Min-jun, surprising herself with how much she'd been holding back. Wait, Soo-yeon interrupted, sitting up straighter. This mysterious cafe man of yours, he just happens to show up at your big client meeting? And you're not curious about who he really is?
Ji-yoon hesitated.
Of course I'm curious. But there's something nice about keeping things simple. After everything with Sung-ho. She trailed off, thinking of her ex-husband. Ji-yoon, Soo-yeon said firmly, not every man is Sung-ho. You can't let one person's betrayal stop you from living. She reached for her phone, presumably to search for information about Min-jun, but Ji-yoon stopped her. Please don't, Ji-yoon said. If there's something I need to know, I want to hear it from him. Soo-yeon's expression softened. You're falling for him, aren't you? Before Ji-yoon could answer, her phone buzzed with a message from Min-jun. Hope you're having a good evening. Missing our coffee talks. The simple text made her smile, which didn't go unnoticed by Soo-yeon. That's all the answer I need, Soo-yeon said, managing a weak smile through her own pain. Just promise me you won't let fear hold you back. We've both lost enough time to men who didn't deserve us. As they stayed up talking until dawn, Ji-yoon felt a shift in her perspective. Watching Soo-yeon face her breakup with determination reminded her of her own journey. They had both been wounded, but they were healing, supporting each other through the process. The next morning, nursing slight hangovers, they went for breakfast at a nearby cafe, not Min-jun's usual place. Over coffee and pastries, they made plans to hold each other accountable for moving forward. Soo-yeon declared she would focus on her upcoming promotion, while Ji-yoon promised to be more open to possibilities with Min-jun. The disruption to Ji-yoon and Min-jun's careful dynamic came unexpectedly one afternoon at the cafe. Ji-yoon was working on design sketches when an elegant older woman in expensive designer clothing approached their usual table. The woman's presence commanded attention, and her sharp gaze fixed directly on Min-jun. So this is where you've been disappearing to, the woman said in crisp Korean. Your father has been trying to reach you about the merger negotiations. Her eyes flickered to Ji-yoon, then back to Min-jun, her disapproval evident.
Min-jun's posture stiffened immediately.
Mother, he said, rising from his seat. I wasn't expecting you here. The transformation in his demeanor was instant. Gone was the relaxed man Ji-yoon knew, replaced by someone more formal, more distant. Clearly, his mother replied. The board meeting starts in an hour. The Kim family's representatives are waiting for your decision on the technology partnership. She paused, her silence heavy with meaning. And you're here, playing at being ordinary. Ji-yoon felt increasingly uncomfortable, understanding she was witnessing something she wasn't meant to see. Min-jun's mother represented a world she hadn't allowed herself to think about, a world of board meetings, mergers, and family expectations. I'll be there, Min-jun said firmly. Please give me a moment. His mother left with a final pointed look at Ji-yoon, who suddenly felt very aware of her casual clothing and modest surroundings. Once they were alone, Min-jun turned to Ji-yoon. I'm sorry about that, he began, but she cut him off. You don't need to explain, Ji-yoon said, gathering her things. I should go. The weight of reality was crushing the comfortable bubble they'd created. Ji-yoon, wait. Min-jun called after her, but she was already heading for the door. The gap between their worlds felt impossibly wide. She had been naive to think they could exist in this in-between space forever. That evening, alone in her apartment, Ji-yoon researched Min-jun's company for the first time. The articles she found painted a picture of a powerful corporate empire, with Min-jun at its center as the youngest CEO in the company's history. Photos showed him in expensive suits at charity galas and business functions, always surrounded by people from his world, a world that seemed to have no place for a divorced interior designer still trying to rebuild her life. Her phone lit up with messages from Min-jun, but she couldn't bring herself to respond. The pressure of being associated with someone of his status, the scrutiny it would bring, the potential for more heartbreak, it all felt overwhelming. In the quiet of her apartment, Ji-yoon thought about his mother's words, playing at being ordinary. Was that what their connection had been? A temporary escape for him from his real life? The thought hurt more than she wanted to admit. After the encounter with Min-jun's mother, Ji-yoon systematically withdrew from their shared routines. She stopped going to their cafe, found a different coffee shop across town, and threw herself into her work. Her phone became heavy with Min-jun's unanswered messages, each one making her heart ache more than the last. "You're running away," Soo-yeon had told her during a late-night call. "Just like I wanted to after my breakup. But you're choosing to be alone this time." Ji-yoon couldn't explain how the weight of Min-jun's world terrified her. She'd already failed at one relationship where the expectations were normal. How could she possibly handle one where she'd be thrust into the corporate elite? The tabloids would dig into her past, find her divorce records, judge her for not being from the right social circle. Meanwhile, Min-jun found himself trapped in an endless cycle of corporate events and social obligations. At a particularly lavish fundraiser, he stood surrounded by eligible women from prominent families, all carefully selected by his mother's social circle. Yet his thoughts kept drifting to Ji-yoon's empty chair at the cafe. The Jung family's daughter would be a suitable match, his mother commented during one such event, nodding toward a poised young woman across the room. Her father's technology company would align perfectly with our expansion plans. Min-jun barely heard her, his attention caught by a magazine featuring interior design work. The layout reminded him of Ji-yoon's style, and he wondered if she was working on new projects, if she was doing okay, if she thought about him too. He made one final attempt to reach her, sending a message. "I never meant to hide who I was. I just wanted someone to see me for me, not my position. Please let me explain." The message remained unread. The corporate world consumed Min-jun's days, but his nights were haunted by memories of easy conversations and shared laughter. During crucial merger negotiations, he found himself sketching coffee cups in the margins of his documents, earning concerned looks from his board members. His executive assistant noticed his distraction. "Sir, the Kim family is waiting for your decision on the partnership," she reminded him gently one afternoon. Min-jun stared out his office window, looking down at the city where somewhere Ji-yoon was living her life without him. "Sometimes," he told his assistant, "the most important decisions have nothing to do with business." But he signed the partnership papers anyway, feeling the weight of his responsibilities press down on him like a physical force. Ji-yoon, meanwhile, walked past their cafe every evening on her way home, but never went in. She told herself it was better this way. Better to end things before they got too complicated, before she got hurt again, before she became a liability to his career and family reputation. Soo-yeon arrived at Ji-yoon's apartment unannounced one evening, armed with determination and takeout food. She found Ji-yoon buried in work, designing layouts for her hotel project, clearly using it as a distraction. "Enough," Soo-yeon declared, closing Ji-yoon's laptop. "You've been miserable for weeks. We both know why." She pulled out containers of food and poured 2 glasses of wine. "Let's talk about the real reason you're hiding from Min-jun." Ji-yoon stared at her glass, avoiding her friend's gaze. "It's complicated," she started, but Soo-yeon cut her off.
No, it's not.
"You're scared. I get it. After what Sung-ho did to you, trust is hard." But Minjun isn't Sungho, and you're not the same person you were then either. Soo-yeon leaned forward. I've watched you rebuild yourself. The Ji-yoon I know doesn't run from challenges. As the evening progressed, Ji-yoon found herself admitting truths she'd been avoiding. Yes, she missed Minjun. Yes, she thought about him constantly. And yes, she was terrified of feeling as vulnerable as she had during her divorce. But here's what I don't understand, Soo-yeon said, refilling their glasses. You're afraid of being hurt, so you're hurting yourself and him instead? How does that make sense? The question hit Ji-yoon hard. She remembered the way Minjun looked at her during their conversations, how he valued her opinions, how he made her laugh when she thought she'd forgotten how. She thought about his support during her client meeting, not because she needed it, but because he believed in her. I'm in love with him, Ji-yoon whispered, the realization striking her with full force. I'm completely in love with him. Soo-yeon smiled softly. I know. I've known since that night you first told me about him. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Ji-yoon stood up suddenly, grabbing her coat. I need to see him. I need to tell him. She paused at the door. I don't even know where his office is. TechWave Corporation headquarters, Soo-yeon said casually. When Ji-yoon looked surprised, she shrugged. Unlike you, I actually Googled him weeks ago. Go get him. Ji-yoon rushed to the corporate district, her heart pounding. As she approached the towering glass building, she saw Minjun through the lobby windows, walking with a beautiful woman in an expensive suit. They were smiling, talking closely, and Ji-yoon felt her world tilt sideways. She stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching them disappear into an elevator together. All her fears seemed validated in that moment. She didn't belong in his world, and he had clearly moved on. Without waiting to see more, she turned and fled, tears blurring her vision. The next morning, Ji-yoon methodically packed her apartment. Each item she placed in boxes felt like another step away from the life she'd tried to build in Seoul. Her phone buzzed repeatedly, Soo-yeon trying to talk her out of leaving, but her mind was made up. Seeing Minjun with that woman had confirmed every fear she'd harbored. She didn't know the woman had been Sarah Chen, a key investor from Singapore, discussing a partnership that could revolutionize their technology sector. She didn't see how Minjun had ended the meeting early, distracted by thoughts of her. She didn't know he'd been gathering courage to break free from his family's expectations, inspired by her authenticity. In the corporate boardroom, Minjun sat through another strategic meeting, his attention divided. A news alert caught his eye, a major design magazine featuring Ji-yoon's hotel project. The article praised her innovative approach, exactly what he'd seen in her work from the beginning. His heart clenched when he realized she'd achieved this without ever knowing he'd quietly recommended her to industry contacts. Mr. Park, his assistant, interrupted his thoughts. Your mother is asking about the dinner with the Young family tonight. Minjun stood abruptly, surprising everyone in the room. Cancel it, he said firmly. Cancel everything. He grabbed his coat, finally ready to choose his own path. But when he arrived at Ji-yoon's apartment building, the security guard informed him she was in the process of moving out. She's been packing all morning, the guard said. Mentioned something about returning to her hometown.
Panic seized Minjun.
He rushed to her floor, only to find movers loading the last of her boxes. Her apartment was empty, the walls bare where her design sketches had once hung. A neighbor mentioned she'd left for the train station 20 minutes ago. In the taxi to the station, Minjun Fi. Nali understood the cost of his silence, of trying to protect their bubble of happiness instead of being honest about who he was. He'd wanted to be seen for himself, not his position, but in doing so, he'd hidden too much of his truth. Ji-yoon stood on the platform, her small suitcase beside her, waiting for the train that would take her away from Seoul, from Minjun, from the dreams she'd dared to have. Around her, families and couples rushed past, their lives continuing while hers felt suspended in uncertainty. She pulled out her phone one last time, looking at the unread messages from Minjun. Her finger hovered over the delete button, ready to erase this chapter of her life, when an announcement echoed through the station. Her train would arrive in 5 minutes. The train station buzzed with afternoon activity as Ji-yoon stood motionless among the rushing crowds. the weight of her decision to leave pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. The station's announcement system crackled again, reminding passengers of the approaching train. Jiyoon, Minjun's voice cut through the station noise. She turned to see him running through the crowd, his usual composed appearance disheveled, tie loose, hair windswept. People stared as he made his way to her, but for once, he didn't seem to notice or care about the attention. "The woman you saw," he said, slightly out of breath, "was Sarah Chin, an investor from Singapore. Nothing more." He stepped closer, his eyes intense. "I've spent weeks in meetings I don't care about, making deals that don't matter, because the only person I want to talk to stopped coming to our cafe." Jiyoon's hand tightened on her suitcase handle. "Your world is so different from mine. Your mother made that very clear." "My world," Minjun laughed, but there was no humor in it. "My world is spreadsheets and shareholder meetings and people who want things from me. But my best moments of the past months have been drinking coffee with you, listening to you talk about design, watching you sketch on cafe napkins." He reached for her hand, and this time, she didn't pull away. "I'm sorry I wasn't completely honest about who I was. I wanted to protect what we had. But I realize now that by hiding part of myself, I risked losing all of you." The train arrived at the platform, doors sliding open. Passengers began boarding, but Jiyoon remained frozen in place. "I don't care about family expectations or corporate mergers," Minjun continued. "I care about the way you see beauty in spaces others overlook. I care about your strength in starting over. I care about you, Jiyoon, exactly as you are." "What about your mother? The company?" Jiyoon asked, even as she felt her resolve weakening. "I told them today, I can be a good CEO and still choose my own happiness. They'll learn to accept that or they won't. But I'm not losing you because of their expectations." The final boarding call echoed through the station. Jiyoon looked at her ticket, then back at Minjun. In his eyes, she saw the same warmth that had first drawn her to him in the cafe. No pretense, no corporate mask, just the man who had helped her believe in herself again. She let the ticket fall from her fingers. Minjun pulled her into an embrace, holding her tight as the train departed without her. Around them, life in the station continued, people rushing to their destinations, announcements echoing overhead, but in that moment, they had found their own destination in each other. "Coffee?" Minjun asked with a smile, wiping away a tear from her cheek. Jiyoon laughed, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "Only if you're buying CEO Park." Hand in hand, they left the station, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead together. Their story wasn't about a CEO and a designer finding love. It was about two people choosing to be brave enough to let themselves be truly seen, corporate titles and past hurts aside.
The end.